At my luxury Napa Valley wedding, I caught my golden child brother slipping a dissolving pill into my champagne glass. I did not scream or cause a scene. I used the reflection of a polished silver serving tray to watch his every move. Then I smoothly swapped our drinks. He smirked at me, completely unaware that his own public destruction was 50 minutes away. I am Sydney, 33 years old, and I work as a cybersecurity consultant. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart a toxic family member who thought they were untouchable. The evening air in Napa Valley was crisp and smelled faintly of crushed grapes and expensive perfume. Fairy lights were strung across ancient oak trees, casting a warm golden glow over the sprawling estate we had rented for the reception. My husband Jason, a 34-year-old corporate lawyer, was across the terrace laughing with some of the senior partners from his firm. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. The music from the string quartet floated through the crowd, mingling with the clinking of crystal glasses and the low hum of wealthy guests networking. From my seat at the sweetheart table, I watched my 36-year-old brother Derek navigate the crowd. Derek was the manager of a cryptocurrency hedge fund and the undisputed golden child of our family. He was wearing a custom Italian suit that probably cost more than my first car, loudly bragging about his latest digital asset acquisitions to anyone who would listen. He had spent the entire evening handing out business cards to Jason's high-profile colleagues, treating my wedding reception like his own personal networking event. In my line of work as a cybersecurity consultant, you are trained to monitor environments for unauthorized access, behavioral shifts, and hidden threats. You learn to spot anomalies. Derek voluntarily offering to go to the bar to fetch me a fresh glass of champagne was a massive anomaly. My brother never did anything for anyone unless it served his own interests. He had not lifted a finger to help with the wedding preparations, yet suddenly he was playing the role of the doting older brother. I stood up, pretending to adjust the heavy lace on the skirt of my wedding gown. A waiter had recently cleared some appetizer plates, leaving behind a large, highly polished silver serving tray on a nearby side table. I positioned myself so I could see the reflection of the bar area behind me perfectly. In the curved silver surface, I watched Derek approach the bartender and take 2 tall flutes of champagne. Instead of walking straight back to me, he took a slight detour behind a towering floral arrangement. He turned his back to the crowd, creating a small blind spot. My heart began to hammer against my ribs, but my training kept my breathing steady. I watched the reflection intently. Derek reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. His hand hovered over the glass on the left. I saw the distinct motion of his fingers dropping something small and white into the bubbling liquid. It fizzed slightly and dissolved almost instantly, leaving the champagne looking completely untouched. A cold wave of realization washed over me. He was drugging my drink. My mind raced through the possibilities. Confronting him right now would cause a massive scene. Derek would deny it, feign outrage, and play the victim. Our parents would immediately rush to his defense, accusing me of being paranoid and ruining my own wedding day with my supposed dramatic delusions. They had spent over 3 decades protecting his image and dismissing my concerns. A public confrontation would only give him exactly what he wanted, an excuse to label me as unstable. Instead, I chose to treat my brother like a piece of malicious software. I would let him breach the outer firewall, track his payload, and redirect it right back to the source. Derek walked back to the sweetheart table with his signature arrogant smirk plastered across his face. He set the 2 glasses down on the pristine white tablecloth. The poisoned glass was placed carefully on the left, directly in front of my chair. The untainted glass was placed on the right, near where he planned to stand for his upcoming toast. "I have to go say hello to the managing partner of Jason's firm," Derek said smoothly, adjusting his expensive silk tie. "Be right back, little sister. Do not start the toast without me." He turned and strode away enthusiastically, greeting a wealthy tech investor who had just walked through the terrace doors. The moment his broad shoulders turned away from me, I made my move. I did not hesitate. I did not look around nervously. With smooth, calculated precision, I reached out and slid the glass on the left over to the right side of the table. I took the glass on the right and placed it directly in front of my own chair. The swap took less than 2 seconds. The glasses were identical, the liquid inside indistinguishable. I sat down, smoothed the fabric of my dress over my lap, and folded my hands. The adrenaline was coursing through my veins, but outwardly, I was the picture of a serene, happy bride. I felt a profound sense of calm wash over me. I was no longer the helpless younger sister, constantly overshadowed and undermined by the family favorite. I was the architect of the system, and I had just rewritten the code. A few minutes later, Derek strutted back to the table, his chest puffed out with self-importance. He took his place beside me, his eyes gleaming with a predatory excitement that sent chills down my spine. He reached out and wrapped his fingers firmly around the stem of the glass on the right. He was holding the poisoned glass, entirely unaware that he was gripping his own downfall. A sharp ringing chime cut through the ambient chatter of the reception. Derek was tapping a silver spoon against his crystal flute. The low hum of conversations faded as guests turned their attention toward the sweetheart table. Jason slid into the empty chair beside me, his warmth a stark contrast to the cold calculation currently running through my mind. Derek loved an audience. He adjusted his stance, ensuring the vineyard lighting hit his profile perfectly before he began. "If I could have everyone's attention," he announced, his voice projecting with the practiced ease of a man used to pitching millions to hedge fund investors. "I want to propose a toast to my little sister Sydney and her new husband Jason." My mother Patricia was seated at the front table, already pressing a napkin to the corner of her eye so as not to ruin her makeup. Next to her, my father Richard nodded with profound pride, though his gaze was fixed entirely on his son rather than the bride. "Growing up with Sydney was an adventure." Derek continued, pacing slightly across the stone patio. While other girls were out socializing or going to parties, Sydney was locked in her room, hiding behind computer screens. She was always so intense, so high-strung. I remember when she was a teenager, always refusing to participate in our family events. My parents tried so hard to bring her out of her shell. They gave her every opportunity, every advantage, but Sydney always insisted on isolating herself. We spent a lot of time worrying about her, wondering how she would navigate the real world when she was so disconnected from it. A few polite chuckles rippled through the crowd. I felt Jason's jaw clench beside me. He squeezed my hand under the table, instantly recognizing the insult wrapped in brotherly affection. "We had to protect her," Derek said, placing a hand over his heart. "It is what a big brother does. I always told my parents that one day someone would come along who could handle her unique brand of chaos, and then came Jason." He gestured toward my husband with a magnanimous smile. "Jason, you are a brave man for taking on our resident computer nerd. You have a lot of patience and you are going to need it. But seriously, we are thrilled to officially welcome you to the family. You give us hope that Sydney has finally found some stability." The word stability was heavily emphasized. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was planting the seed. He was establishing a narrative for all these wealthy guests, for Jason's corporate law partners, and for our parents' high society friends. He was framing me as fragile, erratic, and unstable. That way, when I collapsed on the dance floor in a drugged stupor, no one would suspect foul play. They would just shake their heads, whisper about my mental health, and validate the exact narrative my family had pushed for years. "So," Derek said, turning his body fully toward me and raising his glass high, "to Sydney and Jason, may your marriage bring you the peace and normalcy you so desperately need." The guests raised their glasses, murmuring their agreements and congratulations. Derek stepped closer to my chair. The scent of his expensive cologne was overpowering as he leaned down. To anyone watching from the tables, it looked like a loving brother going in for a warm embrace. He pressed his cheek against mine and whispered directly into my ear, "Congrats, little sister. My surprise is coming soon." The sheer malice in his voice was chilling. He pulled back, his lips curved into a triumphant smirk, his eyes dancing with cruel anticipation. He held out his glass to me, waiting for the customary clink. I did not break eye contact. I did not let my smile falter for a single fraction of a second. I raised the glass I had just taken from the left side of the table, the safe glass, and tapped it gently against his. "Thank you, Derek," I said, my voice steady and bright. "I love surprises." His smirk widened, clearly mistaking my composure for naive ignorance. He tipped his head back and took a long, deep swallow of the champagne. I mirrored his action, bringing my own glass to my lips and drinking the crisp, cold liquid. Over the rim of the crystal flute, I watched his throat work as he swallowed the laced alcohol. He drank nearly half the glass in one go. He lowered his glass, looking utterly satisfied with himself. Giving my shoulder a firm, patronizing squeeze, he turned and marched back into the crowd, immediately beelining toward a group of Silicon Valley venture capitalists he had been trying to impress all night. Jason leaned in close to me. "I am so sorry about that speech," he murmured, anger simmering just beneath his calm exterior. He always finds a way to be incredibly insulting while pretending to be nice. "Are you okay?" I turned to look at my husband, the man who had always stood by me, who valued my brilliant mind rather than feeling threatened by it. "I am perfectly fine," I replied, and it was the absolute truth. I glanced down at my wrist. It was exactly 7:15 in the evening. In my line of work dealing with corporate espionage and physical security protocols, you learn the exact pharmacology of common sabotage agents. The pill I had watched him drop into the glass dissolved rapidly, indicating a fast-acting formulation. Given Derek's goal of creating a highly public, highly embarrassing spectacle, it was likely a potent cocktail. A heavy sedative mixed with a rapid-onset muscle relaxant, or a high-grade gastrointestinal stimulant. Something designed to bypass the digestive system quickly when mixed with alcohol and hit the bloodstream with devastating force. A drug like that does not work instantly. It needs time to metabolize. First comes a slight warmth, a false sense of confidence. Then the cognitive impairment begins, slurring words and loosening inhibitions. Finally, the total loss of motor control. Based on his weight and the amount of alcohol he was consuming, I calculated the timeline. He had 45 to 50 minutes before his nervous system hijacked his body entirely. I looked across the dance floor. Derek was currently shaking hands with the managing director of a major tech fund, laughing loudly, holding his half-empty glass of poisoned champagne. He was at the absolute height of his arrogance, convinced he had just successfully orchestrated my ultimate humiliation. I reached for Jason's hand, feeling the solid grounding weight of his fingers interlocking with mine. The music swelled, the lights twinkled, and the California night air felt absolutely perfect. I smiled and checked my watch one more time. The countdown had officially begun. The first 20 minutes passed in a blur of clinking silverware and the low murmur of polite conversation. Dinner was served, a flawless presentation of roasted quail and truffle risotto. From my seat at the sweetheart table, I kept a peripheral watch on my brother. Derek was holding court near the open bar, a fresh drink in his hand. He was mingling with a group of venture capitalists, aggressively pitching his cryptocurrency hedge fund. I took a slow bite of my dinner, mentally calculating the metabolic rate of the drug he had ingested. Alcohol acts as a potent multiplier for heavy sedatives. By combining the poisoned champagne with whatever whiskey he was currently drinking, Derek was rapidly accelerating his own demise. At the 30-minute mark, the initial phase of the chemical payload breached his system. I saw the exact second the false confidence took over. Derek's posture shifted. He puffed out his chest, waving his arms in wide, exaggerated gestures. His laughter grew uncharacteristically loud, echoing across the stone patio and drawing the attention of nearby tables. My mother, Patricia, glanced over at him with a fond, indulgent smile. In her eyes, Derek could do no wrong. He was simply the life of the party, celebrating his sister's big day. She had no idea she was watching the opening act of a disaster. By minute 40, the cognitive impairment became impossible to ignore. The band had started playing upbeat music and the dance floor was filling up. Derek had managed to corner a prominent Silicon Valley investor near the edge of the red carpet that led into the main ballroom. I watched as Derek swayed on his feet, his center of gravity completely thrown off by the heavy sedative. He leaned in too close to the investor, jabbing a finger into the older man's chest. Even from a distance, I could see the confusion and discomfort on the investor's face. Derek was no longer charming. He was becoming a liability. The drug was stripping away the protective layers of his prefrontal cortex, dismantling his verbal filter. The arrogant, polished facade of the successful hedge fund manager was melting away, exposing the rot underneath. His voice carried over the music, sharp and slurred. I heard snippets of his conversation drifting across the terrace. He was not pitching his business anymore. He was unraveling. He shouted something about margin calls and liquidity. He laughed wildly, swaying dangerously to the left. "You think I have money?" Derek yelled, his voice cracking with a bizarre mixture of panic and drug-induced euphoria. "It is all a house of cards. I am drowning. Every single dime is gone." The venture capitalist took a horrified step back, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. Several other guests turned to stare. The music seemed to fade into the background as the reality of Derek's public breakdown took center stage. My father, Richard, finally noticed the commotion. His face darkened with anger, recognizing that his golden child was making a scene in front of incredibly important people. Richard stood up from his table, aggressively pushing his chair back, intending to intercept his son and quiet him down. But Richard was too late. Minute 45 arrived and the second phase of the drug cocktail activated. The high-grade gastrointestinal stimulant hit Derek like a freight train. I watched his face drain of all color, transforming from flushed, drunken red to a sickly, translucent gray. The wild, slurred laughter died in his throat, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. He clutched his stomach, bending double as a massive cramp seized his abdominal muscles. He looked wildly toward the main building, his eyes locking onto the illuminated sign for the restrooms. He took one step forward, intending to run, but the heavy sedative had already turned his legs to lead. His knees buckled. He stumbled forward onto the plush red carpet, his arms flailing as he tried to catch his balance. He collided heavily with a cocktail table, sending a tower of champagne glasses crashing to the ground in a spectacular explosion of shattered crystal. The noise silenced the entire reception. The band stopped playing. 200 guests froze their eyes, fixed on the man writhing on the ground. Derek tried to crawl away, his expensive Italian suit soaked in spilled champagne. He gasped for air, his face contorted in agony. And then the ultimate unavoidable failure occurred. His body completely hijacked by the aggressive laxative and stripped of all muscular control by the sedative surrendered entirely. The total loss of bodily function was instantaneous and catastrophic. A dark, foul-smelling stain spread rapidly across the fabric of his tailored trousers, seeping directly onto the pristine red carpet. The smell hit the night air, an overwhelming stench that caused the closest guest to gag and stumble backward in absolute horror. Women in designer gowns covered their mouths, their faces pale with shock. Men turned away in disgust. Derek lay in his own filth, sobbing and drooling, his mental state reduced to a primal panic. He was completely helpless, stripped of his dignity, his power, and his golden boy image. The humiliation was absolute, broadcast in high definition to the exact demographic of people he had spent his entire life trying to impress. "Derek!" Patricia shrieked, the sound tearing through the silent night. She dropped her wineglass and rushed toward the red carpet, but stopped abruptly when she saw the extent of the disaster. She covered her nose with her silk shawl, paralyzed by the sheer embarrassment of the situation. Her perfect social standing, her flawless family image was literally soiled on the floor for all of Napa Valley to witness. Richard stood frozen by his table, his fists clenched, his face a mask of mortification. Total chaos erupted. Someone in the crowd yelled for a doctor. A frantic catering manager grabbed a radio, frantically calling for medical assistance. The venue staff rushed forward with towels and privacy screens, trying desperately to block the horrific scene from the guests' view. But it was useless. The damage was done. The memory was burned into the minds of everyone present. Beside me, Jason was on his feet, his phone already in his hand, dialing emergency services. He looked down at me, his eyes wide with shock and concern. I remained seated. I smoothed a stray piece of lace on my wedding dress, picked up my champagne flute, and took a slow, calm sip. Within minutes, the wail of sirens cut through the quiet vineyard. Flashing red and white lights illuminated the oak trees as an ambulance tore up the gravel driveway. Paramedics rushed onto the terrace with a stretcher, pushing through the crowd of disgusted, whispering guests. They loaded my sobbing, incoherent brother onto the gurney, strapping him down as he continued to slur absolute nonsense about his crushing debts and fake crypto funds. I sat in my chair, holding my husband's hand, perfectly composed. I watched the paramedics wheel the stretcher away, leaving behind a ruined red carpet and the shattered remnants of my family's pristine reputation. As the ambulance door slammed shut, I felt a deep, profound sense of peace. The first firewall had been breached, and the system was working exactly as I designed it. The sliding glass doors of the Napa Valley General Hospital emergency room parted with a heavy mechanical hiss. The harsh clinical fluorescent lights above were a brutal contrast to the soft fairy lights of my ruined wedding reception. I walked through the triage area, still wearing my tailored white gown, the heavy silk trailing slightly across the sterile linoleum floor. I must have looked like a ghost drifting into a nightmare, but my mind was operating with absolute clarity. Jason walked close beside me, his hand resting protectively on the small of my back. He was radiating a quiet, dangerous energy, his corporate lawyer instincts fully engaged after witnessing my family drop their masks and expose their absolute madness. Before we even reached the main reception desk, a shrill voice shattered the quiet of the waiting room. "What did you do to him?" My mother, Patricia, marched toward us like a heat-seeking missile. Her perfectly coiffed hair was beginning to unravel, and her expensive silk shawl was clutched tightly around her shoulders. Her face was contorted with a vicious, unhinged rage that she usually reserved for contractors who crossed her at her precious homeowners association meetings. She did not ask if I was all right. She did not apologize for my wedding being destroyed in the most grotesque manner possible. She stopped inches from my face and pointed a trembling manicured finger directly at my chest. "You poisoned him. I know you did. You have always been jealous of your brother." I stared at her, my expression completely blank. I let her words hang in the cold, sanitized air of the hospital. I refused to give her the emotional reaction she was desperately trying to provoke. "Do not look at me with that innocent face," Patricia screamed, her voice echoing down the long corridor and drawing the immediate attention of several triage nurses and a security guard. Just like in college when you put sleeping pills in his coffee so he would fail his finals. You could never stand seeing him succeed while you sat in the dark playing on your computers. The sheer audacity of her delusion was breathtaking yet entirely predictable. I remembered that week in college vividly. It was a foundational piece of the twisted mythology my parents had built around their golden child. Derek had been buckling under the intense pressure of his business degree program. To cope, he had been popping black market stimulants for days to force himself to study, followed by heavy sedatives to force himself to sleep. When his heart rhythm became dangerously erratic and he ended up in the campus clinic right before his macroeconomics final, he needed a convenient scapegoat to avoid our parents' furious wrath. He pointed his finger directly at his quiet, introverted younger sister. He claimed I spiked his drink to sabotage him because I was envious of his popularity. Patricia and Richard swallowed the lie instantly, without a single shred of evidence. It was far easier for them to brand me a jealous villain than to admit their perfect son was cracking under their suffocating expectations and abusing narcotics. Jason stepped smoothly between my mother and me, utilizing his imposing height to force her to take a physical step back. "Patricia, lower your voice immediately," Jason said. His tone was not a request. It was a firm legal boundary being drawn in concrete. "Derek had a severe medical emergency at our wedding. Sydney has done nothing but show up here out of courtesy to check on his condition. If you cannot speak to my wife with basic human respect, we will turn around and leave right now." Patricia gasped, clutching her chest as if Jason had physically struck her. She was entirely unaccustomed to being spoken to with such authoritative defiance. "How dare you speak to me that way? My son is in a treatment room having his stomach pumped because of that vindictive girl." Before Jason could verbally dismantle her again, heavy, aggressive footsteps approached from the hallway leading to the restricted treatment areas. My father, Richard, emerged from the secure double doors. His face was a mask of cold, concentrated fury. During his decades as a ruthless banking executive, Richard had perfected the exact art of intimidation. He used his authority to crush anyone who stood in the path of his family reputation. Tonight, that pristine reputation was lying in a hospital bed covered in its own waste, and Richard desperately needed someone to pay for the damages. He walked straight past Jason, completely ignoring my husband's defensive posture, and locked his dark, piercing eyes onto mine. He did not yell like my mother. He did not need to. His voice was a low, menacing growl that carried far more weight and danger than Patricia's hysterical screaming. "The doctors just gave me the preliminary toxicology report," Richard stated, stepping so close I could smell the stale whiskey on his breath from the reception. "They found extremely high concentrations of a fast-acting sedative and a commercial-grade laxative in his system." I held his gaze, my breathing even and steady. I was mentally preparing for the exact sequence of events I knew was coming next. "He was perfectly fine before he went to your table to propose a toast," Richard continued, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. You handed him a drink, Sydney. I saw you tap your glass against his. I am not going to stand here and ask you for a confession. I am going to call the police right now and have you arrested for the deliberate poisoning of my son. The threat hung heavily between us, dripping with malicious intent. My father stood tall, fully expecting me to crumble into a panic to beg for forgiveness, to revert back to the terrified young girl who used to cower under his domineering shadow. He reached into his tailored suit jacket and pulled out his smartphone, his thumb hovering over the keypad, ready to dial emergency services and ruin my life. Go ahead and make the call, Richard. I said, my voice eerily calm against the frantic energy of the emergency room. Dial the number. Or better yet, save yourself the trouble. I nodded toward a uniformed Napa County Sheriff's deputy who was already marching down the corridor, drawn by my mother's hysterical screaming. The deputy placed a hand on his utility belt, looking between Jason's defensive posture and my father's aggressive stance. Is there a problem here? The deputy asked, his eyes scanning the four of us. This is a hospital, folks. You need to keep the volume down, or I will have you all escorted off the premises. My father immediately seized the opportunity. He puffed out his chest, stepping toward the deputy with the entitled authority of a man who believed he owned the world. Officer, I need to report a crime. My son was just admitted to this emergency room in critical condition. He was poisoned at a wedding reception tonight, and the woman who did it is standing right in front of you. I want her arrested immediately. The deputy frowned, pulling a small notepad from his breast pocket. He looked at me, taking in my heavy white wedding gown and my perfectly serene expression. You are accusing the bride of poisoning a guest? He asked, his tone laced with heavy skepticism. Not a guest, Patricia shrieked from behind my father. Her own brother. She is a vindictive, jealous sociopath. She spiked his drink. The doctors just confirmed he ingested a massive dose of sedatives and laxatives. Arrest her. The deputy held up a hand to silence my mother, then turned his attention back to me. Ma'am, do you have anything to say about these allegations? I did not cry. I did not raise my voice or scramble to defend my character. I simply turned to Jason. My husband reached into the leather messenger bag he had grabbed from the bridal suite before we followed the ambulance. He pulled out my secure encrypted iPad and placed it firmly in my hands. In the cybersecurity industry, paranoia is not a flaw, it is a fundamental job requirement. When you spend your life analyzing threat vectors, you learn never to trust an unverified environment. The moment I booked the sprawling vineyard estate for my wedding, I legally mandated full access to their internal network architecture as part of the venue contract. I had seamlessly mirrored their high-definition security camera feeds directly to my personal device as a standard precaution. When your guest list includes a brother who has spent his entire life trying to sabotage you, leaving blind spots is simply not an option. I unlocked the tablet using my biometric scan and opened the encrypted video file I had clipped just before leaving the venue. I am a cybersecurity consultant, officer. I said, my tone remaining entirely conversational. My professional expertise involves gathering digital forensics to expose malicious activity. I do not deal in baseless accusations. I deal in hard data. I highly suggest you watch this before you write a single word in that notepad. I handed the glowing iPad to the deputy. The screen displayed a razor-sharp 4K resolution feed from the camera mounted directly above the venue's main bar. My parents leaned in, their faces tight with confident anticipation. They truly believed I was cornered. They expected the footage to somehow validate their twisted delusions. Instead, they watched their golden child orchestrate his own demise. The video played in absolute silence. The high-definition lens captured Derek approaching the bartender and taking 2 tall flutes of champagne. It showed him stepping behind the towering floral arrangement, thinking he was entirely hidden from the crowd. But the overhead dome camera had a perfect top-down view of his actions. Look closely at his right hand, I instructed the deputy, pointing at the screen. The deputy watched as Derek reached into his tailored suit jacket. The camera caught the distinct, undeniable motion of Derek dropping a small white tablet into the glass on the left. The tablet fizzed rapidly and dissolved into the champagne. My mother let out a sharp gasp, the sound catching in her throat as she watched her perfect son commit a calculated, premeditated crime. My father stared at the screen, his jaw locked so tightly the muscles visibly twitched. I tapped the screen, fast-forwarding the footage by 2 minutes to a different camera angle focused on the sweetheart table. Here is my brother returning to the table. I continued narrating the evidence with cold precision. You will notice he places the tainted glass on the left directly in front of my chair. The untainted glass is on the right. Now watch what happens when he turns his back to greet an investor. The deputy watched the screen intently. He saw my hand shoot out with flawless speed, swapping the glass on the left for the glass on the right. He saw Derek turn back around, pick up the poisoned glass, smile at me, and swallow the laced champagne. The video ended. The screen faded to black. The deputy handed the iPad back to me, his expression entirely transformed. The skepticism was gone, replaced by a hard professional glare directed straight at my father. "Sir," the deputy said, his voice dropping an octave, "based on the video evidence I just watched, your daughter did not poison anyone. She simply allowed your son to drink the beverage he deliberately tampered with. In the state of California, slipping an intoxicating or debilitating substance into someone else's drink is a felony. If anyone is leaving this hospital in handcuffs tonight, it is going to be your son the moment he is medically cleared." A heavy, suffocating silence fell over the hospital corridor. I watched the cognitive dissonance violently crash over my parents. The irrefutable digital proof of Derek's malicious intent was staring them right in the face. Any normal parent would be horrified. Any rational human being would apologize to me for the false accusations and condemn the brother for attempting to drug the bride at her own wedding. But my parents were not rational. Their entire identities were built on the foundation of Derek's perfection and my inherent inferiority. The pivot happened with terrifying speed. "He was just playing a prank," Patricia suddenly shrieked, her voice echoing wildly off the hospital walls. "It was a joke, a sibling prank. He knew you were too uptight today and just wanted to loosen you up. A prank." Jason repeated, his lawyer instincts flaring as he stepped forward. He tried to drug his sister with heavy sedatives and laxatives in front of hundreds of people. "That is not a prank, Patricia. That is a targeted assault." Richard stepped in front of his wife, his dark eyes locked onto mine with a sudden manic intensity. He completely ignored the reality of Derek's crime and latched onto the only thing he could use to attack me. "You hacked the security cameras at your own wedding," Richard hissed, pointing a trembling finger at the iPad in my hands. "What kind of deranged paranoid psychopath does that? You deliberately set up surveillance on your own family. You sat there, watched your brother make a minor mistake, and you maliciously let him hurt himself." "You are sick, Sydney," my mother chimed in, tears of rage finally spilling down her cheeks. "You have always been deeply disturbed. No normal person spies on their family like this. You need severe psychiatric help." I stood perfectly still, watching them unleash an insane double standard to protect their golden child. Derek attempting to drug me was just a minor prank, but me securing video evidence of his felony was the real crime. They were twisting reality, weaponizing my professional expertise against me to paint me as the villain. I could see the exact moment the realization clicked behind my father's eyes. The sinister shift in his posture signaled that he was no longer just trying to defend his son. He had found the exact angle he needed to execute a far more devastating plan. Richard took a slow, deliberate step toward me. The frantic defensive energy he had displayed just moments ago vanished entirely. In its place was the calculating, ruthless demeanor of a banking executive preparing to execute a hostile takeover of a vulnerable company. He did not care that a law enforcement officer was standing right next to us. In Richard's world, wealth and influence dictated reality, and he was about to rewrite the narrative to suit his agenda. "You think you have won something here today?" Richard said, his voice dropping to a theatrical, mournful pitch, perfectly calibrated for the triage nurses and hospital staff to overhear. "But all you have done is prove exactly how sick you really are." He pointed a steady finger at the tablet secured in my hands. "He was just pulling a harmless prank. Brothers play jokes at weddings. It is what normal families do. But the real crime here, the real sickness, that is you. That is you hacking into a private security network on your wedding day. You spent the happiest day of your life obsessively spying on your own blood. You are deeply paranoid, Sydney. This just proves you are completely mentally unfit to function in society." Jason stepped forward, his voice a low, dangerous warning. Do not speak to my wife like that, Richard. The deputy has the video. Slipping a heavy narcotic into a bride's drink is a felony, not a prank. The deputy nodded, taking out a digital storage drive from his vest. I will need a copy of that video file sent to my precinct, ma'am. We will be speaking with your brother as soon as he is medically cleared, and we will be moving forward with an investigation. Richard did not even flinch at the mention of a criminal investigation. His eyes remained locked on mine, gleaming with a predatory triumph. He was already maneuvering 3 steps ahead of the police, pivoting away from Derek's crime and launching directly into a highly orchestrated financial assassination. Your grandfather was a brilliant traditional man, Richard said, his tone dripping with condescension. He wanted to ensure the wealth he built was protected from reckless, erratic behavior. That is why he trusted me to oversee the execution of his estate. I felt a sudden, sharp chill beneath the heavy silk of my wedding dress. My grandfather had left me a massive trust fund worth $15 million. The stipulations of the document were incredibly specific. The funds were scheduled to be fully released to me upon my 35th birthday, or immediately upon the date of my legal marriage. Today was my wedding day. By all legal rights, that $15 million was scheduled to transfer into my private accounts by Monday morning, but I knew exactly which legal loophole my father was about to weaponize against me. The Morality and Mental Stability Clause. Richard stated, confirming my exact suspicion. It gives me as the sole executor full legal authority to withhold and redirect your inheritance if you demonstrate severe psychological instability or engage in morally reprehensible behavior. Patricia gasped loudly, suddenly, understanding her husband's brilliant, twisted strategy. She is delusional, Richard. We have all seen it tonight. She stood there and watched her own brother collapse in agony, and she did not lift a single finger to help him. She smiled while he suffered. She needs a severe psychiatric evaluation immediately. Richard nodded solemnly, playing the role of the tragically burdened patriarch to absolute perfection. As the executor, I have a fiduciary duty to protect those assets from a woman experiencing a severe psychological break. A woman who illegally spies on her guests and exhibits textbook paranoia cannot be trusted with $15 million. I will be contacting the estate lawyers first thing Monday morning. I am invoking the clause Sydney. I am filing for an emergency conservatorship. The gravity of his threat hung heavily in the sterile hospital air. Jason stiffened beside me. As a corporate lawyer, my husband knew exactly what an emergency conservatorship entailed. It meant stripping me of my basic human and legal rights. It meant freezing my personal bank accounts, seizing my business assets, and treating me like an incompetent child under the eyes of the law. But the most sickening part of the clause was the contingency plan. If I was deemed mentally unfit to manage the $15 million, the full control of that trust fund would automatically default to my next of kin. It would default entirely to Derek. It all made perfect, horrifying sense. Derek attempting to drug me and trigger a public collapse on the dance floor was never just about petty sibling rivalry or ruining my wedding reception. It was a highly calculated financial hit job. They needed me to look crazy in front of hundreds of wealthy witnesses. They needed me hospitalized or institutionalized tonight, so they could immediately trigger the stability clause and steal my inheritance. The fact that Derek had accidentally poisoned himself and ruined his own reputation was just a minor logistical setback in their grand malicious design. You will not see a single cent of that money. Richard vowed, his voice a cold, hard whisper, meant only for me and Jason. I will freeze you out completely. By the time my legal team is done with you, you will not even be able to afford a cup of coffee, let alone fund a defense against a conservatorship. You will be locked in a psychiatric ward, and your brother will manage your estate just as your grandfather would have wanted. I did not scream. I did not cry panic or beg my father to reconsider. Showing any emotional distress right now would only feed his manufactured narrative that I was unstable. I simply locked the screen of my iPad, slipped it safely back into Jason's leather messenger bag, and looked my father dead in the eyes. I let the silence stretch, giving him absolutely nothing to use against me. Let us go, Jason, I said. My voice was perfectly steady, echoing off the linoleum floors with absolute unwavering control. I turned my back on my parents. Jason wrapped his arm firmly around my waist, glaring at Richard one last time before falling into step beside me. We walked away down the long, brightly lit hospital corridor. Behind us, I could hear Patricia comforting Richard, already spinning their web of lies and playing the victims for the surrounding hospital staff. I did not look back. My father truly believed he had just backed me into a corner